Welcome back to the pod for the film fanatic. My name is Colby, and as always, I'm your host for today's podcast. I wanted to start off this podcast by introducing something a little bit different because for today's episode, for the first time, I'm going to be joined by a guest. I'm going to make sure to give him a nice intro here. This guest will be the first guest on the pod for the film fanatic, so I knew I wanted to start it off with a bang. And I wanted to go with the person who probably has given me more than most other people my huge love for movies, and that would be my dad.
Well, thank you, Colby. I'm a longtime fan. I've been following your career for quite a long time, and I'm very honored to be part of this podcast with you.
Well, thank you again for joining me today. I'm really excited for our talk today. And I want you to tell the audience in a minute why you chose the topic for today's episode. But first, I just want to mention, as always, this podcast is being presented by the Now Playing Network. And so I want to thank the Now Playing Network. Like past episodes, I'm going to include the Now Playing Network's web domain in the description of this video. I'm also going to include the Amazon link to the Guide for the Film Fanatic, which is the book that we're going to be looking at today. And I'll also include some links to the films that we're talking about. But, Dad, if you wouldn't mind explaining what is it that made you choose today's topic?
Well, as you vaguely know, and when I was about your age, my first job working out of college was in baseball. I worked in professional baseball, Major League Baseball, again, when I was about your age, until 1994. So it was 1987 to 1994. I worked for 4 years for the Houston Astros, and then I worked 4 more years for the New York Mets, and then we had a baseball strike which shut down baseball, and I went on to different careers and eventually resettled, obviously, here in Texas. And so I worked in baseball, Major League Baseball, for the first 8 years of my professional life, and or almost 8 years. And when you first started talking about this podcast, I was wondering if I actually had met the author, Danny Peary. If you read his bio, he wrote quite a few baseball books in addition to, obviously, all the great film books he wrote. And 3 of the books I know he wrote, he either co-authored or sort of wrote a biography, partial biography of Tim McCarver, who was an announcer with the New York Mets when I worked in New York. He also did a biography of Ralph Kiner, who was another Mets announcer. So I'm pretty sure I actually interacted with Danny Peary. That was a long time ago, and if I did, it was just honestly on a small basis. But when you came to me and said you're going to do books or movies with Danny Peary, I realized there were a lot of baseball movies in here, and I thought that would be a great topic.
Yeah, no, I think that is a really great topic, especially for you. Because if I had to be conservative here, I would say the 3 things that I've always known you to love would be movies, of course, and then history, obviously, but I would also say baseball would be up there for you. And so I'm not at all surprised that you wanted to talk about baseball films. And also, I would say that Danny Peary's book includes, like I've mentioned, about 4,000 films. But compared to most small subsections, like I would consider baseball a small subsection, he actually includes a lot of baseball movies in the book. I think by my count, there's like 14 to 15 baseball films in this book, and we're not going to cover all of them. We're only going to cover about half of them today. I guess if people are interested, maybe one day we can come back and do the other half. But we do have a lot of the heavy hitters today. And I think with that, we'll go ahead and start discussing these 8 films.
Well, actually, one other thing I'd love to add is that I think baseball really works better for the background of movies more so than any other sport. I mean, I think boxing might be a close second. Obviously there have been great films on basketball or football and some other sports, but I think baseball allows for human interest stories on a much stronger level than the other team sports. There's golf movies, there's tennis movies out there, but just we're going to go chronologically, I know, and going back to the 1940s until modern day, there have been so many amazing baseball films. And then the one other thing I was going to add is I know the book came out, what year did it come out again?
It came out 86.
Okay, so 1986. So unfortunately, there's some amazing baseball films that came out after the book was published that we can't talk about today. So
League of Their Own.
Yeah, League of Their Own or Field of
Yeah.
Dreams. Eight Men Out is a great one. Bull Durham. So
Yeah, Bull
so we're going to focus on the ones in the book. Some of them are terrific as well, but there are some again amazing baseball films people could watch if they really want to see it well done.
Yeah, yeah. No, we're gonna be hitting some heavy hitters today too. But the one that we should start with would be the earliest baseball film in the book, and really one of the earliest baseball films, period. And that would be The Pride of the Yankees.
The story of an American hero, cheered and idolized by millions, a symbol of courage and true sportsmanship. The Pride of the Yankees.
So, The Pride of the Yankees is probably among the more famous baseball films that we're going to be covering today. And you had this great idea of, in addition to talking about the films, which we'll do, you also wanted to use this interesting rating system. Do you mind explaining what the rating system is?
Sure, although I don't know how original it is, but and in fact, I would love to share some baseball stories from when I worked in baseball. And I know one of the Hall of Famers I had the pleasure of working with, Yogi Berra, had the same rating system. But baseball, you can get a home run, a triple, a double, a single, and so I would love to just say what I think of each homer and give it on that, or each movie,
Sure.
and put it on that scale.
Okay, yeah, I like that idea a lot. Well, before we discuss where we think The Pride of the Yankees falls on that, what did you think? What were your early impressions of The Pride of the Yankees? Had you seen it before, or was this your first time?
Yeah, no, I think I definitely had seen this before. I mean, it's a classic, and what, it came out in 1943. All the films I'd seen before, I was probably returning to after a long stretch where I hadn't seen it. So, maybe it's been 30 plus years since I've last seen this film. And I grew up not as a Yankees fan, which of course, Pride of the Yankees is all about the great Lou Gehrig, one of the best New York Yankee players ever. And so, it was a little, I didn't love anything about the Yankees growing up because I really hated the Yankees growing up. But Lou Gehrig is just, the inspiration for so many, and he had the strongest human interest story. So it was fun to kind of go back and watch it again.
Yeah, so if you don't know what The Pride of the Yankees is about, it's a biopic, which is typically one of the avenues that baseball films most often fall under. And this is a biopic on Lou Gehrig. So one of the more famous baseball players of all time. I was certainly familiar with him. Obviously now he's kind of synonymous with ALS. And the film touches on not only his disease and how that ultimately killed him, but it also touches on his start in baseball, his career, how great he was ultimately at baseball. We see a lot of the film focus on his wife and his mom and his dad. And I just thought it was really impactful, I think, in a lot of ways. Gary Cooper played Lou Gehrig, and in some ways I think it was one of the stronger performances of a baseball player that we're going to see in this entire marathon. It was also a huge Oscars contender. Do you have on hand what type of Oscars it was up for?
Actually, did not write all of that down, but I think it won 4, if I remember.
Yeah, and I think it might have been nominated for about 11.
Okay.
So, yeah, certainly it was a huge hit at the Oscars in 1943. 1943 was not one of the strongest years in Academy history, but I do think this film holds up as one of the better baseball films of all time. It's also just one of those great emotional stories.
Right, and then, as you're watching all these baseball films, whether you're a true baseball fan or just a casual follower, you want to make sure the baseball looks accurate. Mm-hmm. You want to make sure the actors they have who are playing the baseball players look like they know how to play baseball. And Gary Cooper, honestly, I would say is probably on the lower end of the spectrum of what we saw in these 8 films. I think some of the others, maybe even Robert Redford would be up at the top. The ones we can't talk about today, Kevin Costner. I mean, those guys definitely look like they were ready to be baseball players, a little more than Gary Cooper. One thing this film has, which is, and there were a couple others on our list like this too, they had a lot of baseball players using or kind of in cameos or even playing themselves, like Babe Ruth.
Yeah, this is one of only, I think, 2 Babe Ruth films where he plays himself. He always played himself, obviously. But yeah, he was good in this, I thought. He was fun.
And, I think while I love the film and the story of him and Eleanor, his wife, really does, I guess, shape the first half of the film for sure. You do get a little bit of his upbringing and, poor childhood and then his days at Columbia University before he was signed to the Yankees. While that's all important, really it's a love story between Lou and Eleanor. One of the things that kind of is interesting to me watching this film in retrospect is it came out so soon after the tragic death of Gehrig. He had died in 1941. This film was filmed the next year and came out in 1940. I think it came out I was going to say late 42 even. But anyway, it comes out, within 2 years of Gehrig's death. And I don't know, that's so soon after after a huge event and human interest story like the death of one of the greatest baseball players ever.
Yeah, no, I definitely think in some ways maybe the film was too soon. It probably could have benefited a bit from having some more time after Gehrig's death. But honestly, this was one of those films. This was the first one, just to give a peek behind the curtain. This was the first one that we watched together. And we watched all of these films together, which was really nice. But I think that I didn't realize how good it was until after I saw the other films. But this is just typical golden Hollywood. I mean, we're going to be covering films from the 40s through the 80s. And so that's 40 years of baseball films. And a lot of them take place in different times, too, ranging from like the 19-teens to the 1970s. So I think that we got to see the sport of baseball evolve, but also filmmaking evolve. And this is basically a baseball film totally within the scope of classic Hollywood. So it's got that schmaltzy classic Hollywood style to it. Teresa Wright plays Eleanor Gehrig, his wife, and she's great in every film she's in. And she's so amazing here. And she actually, just as a little aside, she did win the Oscar for this role. She might not have won, but she was certainly nominated for the Oscar for this role. And this was only her second film, and it was coming off of the back of her first film, Mrs. Miniver, where she also was nominated for the role.
Right, and that's the one I think she did win the Oscar for. And we can double check all of that, I guess, right?
Yeah.
But, so many big names were involved in this. I mean, Herman Mankiewicz wrote the screenplay, and Joe Swerling. So they co-wrote it, actually. It's Sam Wood directing it. As we already mentioned, Gary Cooper in the lead. But even though it's the first, chronologically, it's funny, we do see some of the same venues. I mean, we constantly see Yankee Stadium in a lot of the scenes. I really thought that one of the issues with this film, the thing that prevented it from a home run, I gave it a triple, was it struggled in the pacing. But then you get to the last 20 minutes, which, of course, is when Gehrig, who was known as the Iron Man because he had the longest consecutive game playing streak in baseball history until Cal Ripken broke it decades later. Gehrig starts to suffer ALS, what then they'll later call Lou Gehrig's disease after him, and he takes himself out of the game. And if you read about it, it didn't happen exactly the way they showed in the film. But then his career's over. He goes on to do a couple things in the short time he has left before he does tragically die. But the film ends with the classic Lou Gehrig Day, which was July 4th, 1941. And it's between games of a doubleheader, and it's when Gehrig makes that speech at Yankee Stadium. I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. And you can't end a film with a more powerful moment than that particular speech. So I really loved the last 20 minutes or so of the film, but there was some a pacing issue, I felt, leading up to that dramatic ending.
Yeah, I would agree. I would also give this a triple, so we're kind of on the same mark here. But just without spoiling anything too much, some of these future films I will not be giving triples to. So I would say if you love classic Hollywood, this would be the baseball film that I would say is without a doubt the one you should watch.
Can I mention one other thing about the film? One part of the film that I love is, you'll see the interaction between Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. And apparently, while they had an okay relationship, they were the two most famous players, and that they butted heads every now and then. But there's the one scene where they go to visit the little boy in the hospital.
Timmy in the hospital.
Yeah, and that's I love that scene because what you see is Babe Ruth playing it up for the cameras. The still cameras who are there, promising to hit a home run, and then you see Gehrig in the movie. The boy asks him to hit 2 home runs, and There are some amazing parodies of that. Maybe you can actually find one of these and put it as a YouTube link. But you see an SNL skit on it later, and you see Second City TV did a funny one with John Candy, and the little boy's asking the Babe Ruth character to hit a home run, but then to do a cartwheel in this hospital room, and John Candy, as Babe Ruth, is saying, "Okay, kid, you're asking me a little bit too much."
And Babe, your third time up, could you hit one over the scoreboard at the back of the bleachers?
It's quite a shot, kid. That's 500-600 feet. I don't know if I can do that. All right, I'll do it. Don't worry about it, kid.
So anyway, it's hard to see that scene without me personally thinking of the many times it's been parodied. But, sorry for the long stories, one of my roles in baseball when I worked in this role was I would take players to hospitals like that. So, it does happen the way you see it in movies. The baseball players are often doing things for kids, and that part doesn't get mentioned many times, and a lot of those baseball players do have those hearts of gold.
Yeah, no, that was nice, and I thought that was a really good scene as well. Well, I think with that, we both said this was a triple, so we're going to move ahead now a few years to a completely different film. It's actually more akin to a comedy, and that would be It Happens Every Spring.
Right down the old groove here. Here we go. Wow! That's making them hop in there, Professor, old boy.
So It Happens Every Spring, like I said, is a comedy, which is very different than Pride of the Yankees, which is pretty much a drama through and through. But It Happens Every Spring follows a college professor who has been working on some serum. And we don't really need to get into the how or the why he's making this serum. But he has a science experiment go wrong when these kids outside of his laboratory hit a baseball through the window, and the baseball lands inside of his experiment, right? Sure. And it's goofy, but essentially he finds out that when this baseball is put into the serum, it repels wood. So if you're a pitcher and you're pitching this baseball out of bat, the bat will not be able to hit the ball. The ball will kind of fly wildly out of the way at the last second because the ball is repellent to wood. And he uses this discovery, instead of trying to sell his invention or do anything practical with it, he decides that he's going to be a pitcher, and he's going to play in the majors, and he's going to use this ball serum to become the MLB's greatest pitcher. And what did you think of this film?
Well, as you said, it was comedy, and it's very silly. To me, it kind of would lead to what we would see later, a couple decades later, with some of the Disney sports films, where you almost have the same kind of thing. Flubber, which, the Disney remake with that, or the computer wore tennis shoes is one sort of in that same genre. Ray Milland, who plays the baseball player, he was coming off an Academy Award performance as an alcoholic in
The Lost Weekend.
The Lost Weekend, right. And here it is, just a couple years later, he's playing a pure comedic performance. This one was probably at my lower end. I mean, I really thought it was just so inaccurate that I am only going to give it a single.
Okay.
Or maybe a double, but you really have to stretch it out to turn it into a double.
Yeah, you really have to suspend disbelief here. I'm going to give this a double just because watching 8 films, it was nice to watch one that was fully a comedy, but it's a weak double, like you said. You can come up with some baseball terminology for a weak double. Like it's a grounder and
yeah, I mean it's a ground rule double. The outfielder should have caught the ball, but it got over his head, and then it went over the outfield wall for a ground rule double. Ray Milland didn't really seem like a baseball player, and he's not.
No.
He's a college professor. But his whole romance that we have in this film didn't really seem to make sense.
Yeah,
either.
he's dating the daughter of the dean, and she's one of his students. So she's maybe 19, 20, and he's in his 40s, and it's just goofy. Like, I don't know why that was needed. And a lot of the ways that he escapes capture here, like no one catches on to the fact that he's cheating, essentially.
Yeah, doctoring him. He's got a hole in his glove, and that's where the formula is. And it's just like, you guys could not swing the bat. You could take your walks because he isn't throwing strikes every time.
Yeah.
And you really have to suspend your baseball pure beliefs to watch this one.
Yeah, but I think a double sounds good, maybe a single. Again, it's a fun comedy, and I'm going to just give you a little taste of each baseball film as we talk about them, because there's a baseball film for everyone, which I know that's one thing that you've mentioned that you love about baseball films. There's a lot of variety here in what we're talking about. And so if a comedy's not for you, one film that could be for you would be a very all-American romance, which we see in The Winning Team.
The true story of Grover Cleveland Alexander and the woman who shared all the adventures of his fabulous career.
So The Winning Team is another biopic. It's our second biopic. This time it follows Ronald Reagan, future President Ronald Reagan, as Grover Cleveland Alexander. And it follows both his baseball career as well as some ailments he suffers. He suffers from dizzy spells and fainting, double vision. And then Doris Day plays his wife, who is just, without getting too ahead of myself, I think she's one of the worst wives in film history. She just is completely doting on him the entire time. She has very little to do in this film. But
yeah, and that's unfortunately a theme in pretty much all the baseball films we watch together. They don't have strong roles for the female characters. That's going to come around until maybe the late 80s, 90s before you finally get little stronger roles for the women in these movies.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, A League of Their Own is the best, obviously.
And even I would throw Bull Durham in there. Susan Sarandon has, even though she's basically a baseball groupie in that movie, she has a stronger role than anything you would have seen in the other 8 films we're watching.
Well, I thought Teresa Wright's role in The Pride of the Yankees was much better than Doris Day's role here, and this is 10 years later. But essentially in this film, I mean, Doris Day is a baseball player's wife, and so she helps Grover Cleveland get over his he gets really depressed when he is having these dizzy spells, and at one point he essentially, instead of divorcing her, he runs away from her because he thinks that she's just causing him grief, and he joins the circus. I mean, do you even remember this? We just watched this.
Yeah, I know. That I've kind of put that out of my memory already, but and I didn't really know much about Grover Cleveland Alexander before watching this film. This might have been the only film in this list, or I still don't know if I'd seen the original. I guess it happens every spring, but I definitely had not seen The Winning Team before we watched it together. But I do know, Grover Cleveland Alexander was one of baseball's winningest pitchers ever, and he did have these demons he was dealing with. Although I think the film kind of watered it down. I mean, part of the issue was he also was an alcoholic, which probably isn't that uncommon with a lot of baseball players of that era. I mean, Babe Ruth liked to drink, but they didn't, play that up in the movie. And we were looking it up later, and about the time this movie came out, because it came out, in the same era as some of the other baseball biopics, they kind of just forgot the fact that maybe he and his wife had not stayed together. They got divorced in real life.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't forget that fact. I think, whether it was the Hays Code or whether it's just they thought that would make the better story, I mean, they turned this very tumultuous relationship that he had with his wife, where they divorced twice. They divorced, they got back together, and they re-divorced. They completely omit that from the film. I mean, Doris Day, she is there for him in all of his games. She is cheering him on. When he catches a glimpse of her, when Ronald Reagan catches a glimpse of her in the stands, he suddenly starts to pitch better and play better. And it's just, I don't know. I think this one, I think is maybe the worst of the 8. This would be a single for me, a strong single. And I just don't see how there was too much redeeming here.
Yeah, and I definitely would give it a single as well. And another reason perhaps it's on that lower end is Ronald Reagan, even though he had gotten a start in Hollywood, before Hollywood, he was a broadcaster. He did some baseball broadcasting, radio. He didn't really come across as a baseball pitcher. Most of the other actors I thought were stronger than he was.
Yeah, I would agree. I didn't think he was very impressive. And Doris Day, she was fine. I liked Doris Day a lot, but this is 10 years before her Rock Hudson comedies, and that's where she really finds her own. So I would say this would be the only one I would say you should totally skip, because if you're looking for a romance, you'll find something much better in Pride of the Yankees. But with that, we're going to once again shift genres, and now we're going to go to a biopic that is almost verging in my opinion, a little bit on horror, and that would be Fear Strikes Out.
Get in the dugout,
So, Fear Strikes Out. Do you want to take a turn and explain what's going on in this film?
Okay, well, this is another one that's depicting the life of a real baseball player, and that's Jimmy Pearsall, who was mostly with the Boston Red Sox. He bounced around to a couple different teams. And then he was one who I was wondering if I'd ever met, but I don't think I did. He became an announcer and a front office scout. He worked a lot for the Chicago White Sox he played with, and then I might have interacted him because I think he was briefly with the Cubs, but I just don't remember meeting him. But he was later known. He did some crazy things on the ball field. Like I know the story that when he hit his 100th career homer, he ran around the bases backwards. I mean, not going third, second, first, but running literally backwards to first base, then to second base. And so he was an interesting character, but, the movie is all about the hard relationship he has with his father. Hopefully that's something that you would never write a screenplay on. I pushed you too hard. But anyway, his father, played by Carl Malden, really, it almost seems like he was a baseball player and never made it. So he kind of takes that out on his son. And his son's an amazing baseball player, but struggles thinking he's not doing enough, And so and this is in the 1950s, he begins to, suffer from mental illness. And there's some really intense scenes, especially later in the film, where he actually has breakdowns and he's given like electroshock therapy.
Yeah. No, it's definitely very intense, which is why I said it's almost a horror film. And also, I'm probably assuming it's somewhat of a horror film because Jimmy Pearsall is played by Anthony Perkins, who I just automatically associate with Norman Bates, obviously. But this is, my second consecutive episode talking about Anthony Perkins. And I love Anthony Perkins. I think that he carries this film in a lot of ways. Because, interestingly, Peary said this in his book, and I didn't know this to be true, but I guess this was Anthony Perkins' first leading role. So this was, 8 years before Psycho? So he's young here, and he's really good, I thought.
Yeah, and again, I'm trying to measure this by, do they look like baseball players? Are you believing those scenes? And I think that was definitely the case with what we saw here. They filmed it at a lot of baseball stadiums. Now, some are going to be inaccurate. There's one scene, I don't think it's spoiling anything late, where you see Pearsall climb the fence behind home plate. I don't think that ever happened, and I don't think, I don't think even a baseball fan would have thought that would have happened. But most of the scenes, what we see on the baseball diamond, I feel are fairly true to life.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that because, I agree. I thought the film was pretty realistic. But one of the things that makes this so interesting is this is another biopic. It's our third biopic. And unlike the previous two, where our baseball players were dead before the film was made, Jimmy Pearsall was not only still alive when this film was made, but he was still playing in the majors. So he was playing in the majors for 17 years, and this film was released during his 7th year in the majors.
Yeah, and right, so do the math. He still played another decade, and he was never, a star along the lines of, say, Lou Gehrig or Grover Cleveland Alexander. I mean, he wasn't a Hall of Famer. And I sort of wonder if this film kind of came out too early. Like, it might have been handled a little bit differently, like Pride of the Yankees, if it had been done not so close to, in this case, during his career in Pride of the Yankees, just 2 years after Gehrig's death.
Yeah. Where would you think you'd rank this one? A single, double?
I actually gave this a triple. And this was another one that actually I had not seen. So this was the second one I had not seen of our 8. No, I'll give it a 3-bagger.
Yeah, okay. I think I'm going to give it a double, but this was one, Peary, like I said, he includes 14 baseball films, which is certainly more than he includes for any other sport. And one of the things that's interesting about that is it's, in my opinion, very clear that he loves baseball movies, and this is one that I think would not be in a list of the 5 baseball films if he was only to include 5. So I'm glad that he actually did include so many, because it means we get stuff like Fear Strikes Out, which I'll give a double, but I still think it's a good film. I think Perkins is a great actor. I just wonder if it would have benefited, like you said, from a little bit more time and not being released during the middle of Pierce Hall's career, because then it gets into weird things where you kind of wonder, are they making him look better or are they making him look worse? It just gets into the politics of it, I think. But yeah, this was a good movie. I would say if you're looking for some more Anthony Perkins, this would be a fun one to watch. But Danny Peary, like I said, he has a lot of baseball films here, and the next film that we're going to talk about is the one that he lists as his favorite baseball film of all time, and that would be Bang the Drum Slowly.
Please welcome for a return engagement on this program the Singing Mammoths and their newest member, Bruce Pearson.
Cause I've been on the road to tribulation, and I find no consolation here.
So Bang the Drum Slowly is it's a very interesting film. How would you describe this film?
I would almost say it's like Of Mice and Men, but played on a baseball field.
That's good, yeah.
It's really a story of a pitcher and a catcher, fictional, who are trying to make it to the majors. And like some of the other ones we've been talking about, one of the players, in this case the catcher, who's played by Robert De Niro, begins to suffer from a terminal disease. In fact, the movie begins with that. And it's really the love between those two players. I mean, the camaraderie and the relationship between De Niro as the catcher and Michael Moriarty as the pitcher.
Yeah. And so, yeah, this is an early role for De Niro. And it's funny, Perry also said that when he first saw this film, he expected Moriarty would be the one who would go on to stardom. And obviously, it was De Niro. But the thing that's interesting about this movie is its message to me is a little bit simple. And this is probably the first one that we're really going to disagree on, because I know this is one that you really liked and I really didn't like. So I'll say the thing that I didn't care for about this film is the message of this movie, kind of like Of Mice and Men, is to be nice to people because you don't really know what's going on with them behind closed doors. Because the whole message here is that everybody's mean to De Niro because he is he's not a good ball player, and he really isn't. He's kind of simple, and everybody likes Moriarty. In fact, Moriarty, he's offered a position in the majors, and in his contract, one of his stipulations is that De Niro has to be always on the same team as him. So De Niro has to be signed into the majors too, and if he gets bought by another team, De Niro needs to come with him, which is just, in my opinion, it's kind of crazy, right?
Yeah, I don't know if that contract would have flown, but I don't know. There have been some other weird contracts in baseball history, so you can, again, suspend belief on that part of it. I think, to me, I mean, maybe I didn't like it as much as you thought I liked it. I'm going to give it a double, okay? So it's not up at the top there for me either. You know, it's a kind of story. I'm sure there's some people shedding tears near the end. I wasn't. But my problem is I'm going to always compare this one to another sports film that came out around the same time, and that was a TV movie called Brian's Song, the original, which is telling the football story, true story of Gale Sayers and Brian Piccolo, played by Billy D. Williams and James Caan. And that one, I think, does the same kind of story, a relationship between two players so much more impactfully. And so I kind of compared the two, and I think Bang the Drum Slowly can't compare. Although I will say, one or two moments in this film were just so well shot. And this is a movie anyone should see if they've never seen it before.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, if only to see early De Niro. One of the things that I think is interesting about this film is kind of a behind-the-scenes story, which is that, first off, this was one of De Niro's first roles, like one of his very first roles, and he auditioned for this film 5 times before he got the role. But originally, the role of this player was supposed to go to Al Pacino. But at the same time that they were filming this movie, they were filming the original, The Godfather. And so Al Pacino couldn't do this film because he was working on The Godfather at the time. And so the studio went to Francis Coppola and said, is there anyone else, any other Italian actors that you have on set of the first Godfather right now that you'd be able to have in Pacino's place? And there was one actor who had a very small role in the first Godfather as a taxi driver, and that was De Niro. And he said, you can have De Niro for this film. And so essentially what happened is De Niro left The Godfather. He no longer was the taxi driver. He got this role. And then, as every film fan knows, he's in the second Godfather film, this time playing Don Corleone. So it's just this crazy story where this movie completely shaped the Godfather history and in turn movie history. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, and I'll let you share all these great or movie stories. I'll share a quick baseball story. This film came out in 1973, and a lot of it was filmed at Shea Stadium, although they never identify it as such. It's a fictional team that De Niro and Moriarty are playing for. But during that year, I think it was 1973, I'm going to have to double check it, but there were two baseball teams in New York City, the Mets and the Yankees. And Yankee Stadium, the original Yankee Stadium, the one you would have seen in Pride of the Yankees, a couple of the other ones we talked about, was being refurbished that year. So the Yankees played all their home games at Shea Stadium. And I was living in New York at the time. I was a child, just developing my love for baseball. And, I was sort of wondering when they filmed this, but they must have done it during the winter, because there was no way they could have done a baseball movie at Shea Stadium, because they were playing there almost every day.
Yeah, no, I'm sure they did. But yeah, I think this was an interesting film. I would give this one a double as well. So we actually are kind of on the same page here. But I think we should probably move towards the one that I would say pretty certainly you and I both consider our favorite of this entire marathon, and that would be the original The Bad News Bears.
All season long, you've been laughed at, crapped on. Now you got a chance to spit it back in their faces. You're out there like a bunch of dead fish, not listening. Bonehead plays. Mistakes.
So I don't think The Bad News Bears needs any introduction. It's certainly... would you say it's the most famous film we're talking about today?
I don't know. Pride of the Yankees might be a little more famous, but... yeah, it's up there.
Yeah. So it doesn't need an introduction, but if you don't know, The Bad News Bears follows a Little League baseball team. So it's very different than all of the other films we're talking about, because the focus here is children. And obviously this film was so famous that it's spawned, a whole slew of children in sports films like The Mighty Ducks or The Sandlot.
Plus remakes, 3 additional Bad News Bears films and a later version with Billy Bob Thornton in the lead.
Yeah, so again, so to start here with my rating, this would be the only film actually that I'm going to give a home run to. I thought The Bad News Bears, I had seen it before, and it was one of the only films here I had seen before. But The Bad News Bears is, in my opinion, the best of every single kids in sports film. The way that they humanize this team, the Bad News Bears, or I guess just the Bears, is really... powerful, I'd say. They totally get you to root for them in a way that none of these other underdog films do. And you would say the same, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And for me, there's so much nostalgia around this film because I would have seen it in the theaters. It's the only one on this list. Well, actually, one more that I would have seen in theaters. But, I was of the age where I'm the same age as the Little Leaguers that you see in this film. And the casting was just perfect.
Yeah. It really was. Yeah, we get Tatum O'Neal, obviously, as in kind of the leading role of the young star of the team. And she's fresh off of Paper Moon here. Or not fresh, it was like a few years later. But this is her follow-up to Paper Moon, where she won the Oscar, youngest woman to ever win an Oscar, still to this day. And, yeah, who else would you say?
Well, okay, if we're talking Bad News Bears, we've got to talk about Walter Matthau. Walter Matthau as Butterworth, the coach. And the film, is just perfectly cast with him as sort of the, the has-been who has to go ahead and coach these mostly losers, kids who can't be on any other team, and yet, go on to the championship, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's great, and I wonder if Walter Matthau, what he thought of this film, to be honest, because I know for the rest of his career he kind of was playing similar characters. I mean, he was in Dennis the Menace, which was probably the first thing I ever saw him in. So he kind of became the curmudgeon-y old guy dealing with children for the rest of his career.
And then we should also mention Jackie Earle Haley as Kelly Leak, one of the other premier baseball players. And you know, there are some other great child actors in it, but I don't know how many went on to big roles. It really, to me, is those three. Although, you know, you've got some
Vic
of the
Morrow.
other... Yeah, Vic Morrow as the other coach, and a couple other women, you know, who have more minor roles.
You know, yeah, one of the things I really liked about this film, actually, now that we're saying Vic Morrow, is his character, in my opinion, is what makes this film stand above all of the other kids in sports films. Because normally, those films, their stakes are low, ultimately, right? But in the championship game of the Bad News Bears, Vic Morrow, he's the coach of the team that they're facing.
The Yankees.
Yeah, the Yankees. And his son is the pitcher. And at one point, he's yelling at his son, and he goes onto the mound, and he slaps his son. He slaps his kid in front of, you know, in the middle of the championship game in front of everybody. And it's just like, that's the type of thing that this film does that makes it stand above, in my opinion, is the stakes are a lot higher, you know.
And yet, I really thought it may have been the most accurate of all the baseball films we watched, because nothing that you see in any of these games seemed to be out of the realm of possibility. I mean, you know, the Bears are losing their first game 26-0 in the first inning. There probably are little league teams. There might be a 10-run rule used in a situation like that, but you know, finally Matthau as coach pulls his kids off the field, and the kids are angry because they want to keep going, but they couldn't do anything. They couldn't field. And you know, you believe as he gets Tatum O'Neal's pitcher and Jackie Earle Haley as the star hitter, and then a couple other players really develop on their own too. But yeah, they can win their games. They're winning close games, and then in this championship game, we won't give away the ending. But I don't think it's again, inaccurate. You know, maybe God hope that no coach ever goes out and hits one of his players on the field. But you know what? In Little League history, I bet it's happened somewhere.
Oh, I'm sure it has too. Yeah, I just thought this was great. I mean, this is the one that, you know, I would sit down and rewatch again right now. It's fun. It's a little outdated, a little politically incorrect, because a lot of these kids are just kind of walking stereotypes. You know, they have the fat kid, and they have two kids who can't speak English, you know, and they have the twerp, and they have like a Jewish kid, you know. Yeah,
and there's some, again, definitely things they would have to update if they did it here in 2020s. But just perfect casting from top to bottom, and go see the Bad News Bears if you've never seen it. I also give it a home run.
Nice. Okay, yeah. Well, so we're pretty much in agreement there. And now we're in the 1970s, so we're heading into the final two films, both of which I liked, one of which I liked more than the other. But next we're going to go for a film that was released the same year as the Bad News Bears, and in some ways I think that actually hurt its commercial success because it was overshadowed as the better baseball film of 1974.
Well, actually, I think they both came out in 1976.
And that would be the Bingo Long Traveling All-Stars.
Ladies and gentlemen, meet the Bingo Long Traveling All-Stars and Motor Kings, the greatest congregation of athletic talent ever to assemble in one place at one time for one purpose.
Okay, so the Bingo Long Traveling All-Stars and Motor Kings. This is one that I actually can give a story on because I do have somewhat of a relation to this film. So I first heard about this film a few months ago when I was at the Turner Classic Movies Film Festival. And this film was being introduced, and it was being shown by Billy D. Williams, who is the star of this film. He's also the star of Brian's Song, as you just mentioned. He's obviously known for Star Wars. And he was there at the TCM Film Festival, and I got to meet him. And he was a super nice guy. He's getting a little forgetful in his age now. He's not so old. He's in his 80s, I think. But he was just this very nice guy, and he seemed to be really excited by the fact that instead of introducing Star Wars like he probably most often does, he was introducing the Bingo Long Traveling All-Stars, which is this really interesting film from the mid-'70s. It's very underseen, but it's kind of like a Motown movie about this team of all black players who try to break their way into the majors.
Right, and it's using a lot of the players. They're all fictional, as we see in this movie, but they're based on real people. So you've got James Earl Jones, who, there's another Star Wars connection as Darth Vader, but he's playing the big hitter, who almost certainly is based on a real, Negro Leagues baseball player, Josh Gibson. And the film shows how these players were playing in these all-black leagues because baseball was not integrated, and this film was based in the 1920s into the 30s.
Yeah.
The integration is going to come when Jackie Robinson will, be the first black ball player. But we see the villains of this film are the owners of these teams.
Yeah, because essentially the way that we see this film is being set up is that these black ball players are not being given they're not being treated very fairly by their black owners. The owners are not having the teams play in utmost conditions on good fields, and they're accepting bribes maybe, and so at a certain point very early on in the film, they just get fed up, the players, and they decide they're going to make their own team, which is Bingo's team. Bingo is the lead of the film, and he decides he wants to make his own baseball team.
Right, and that part is accurate. I mean, there were barnstorming teams that would go and play. I mean, they go play a House of David team at one point, which those kind of teams existed, of players who might have been all Jewish, who might not also have had a chance to play in the majors. But my issue with this film, I hadn't seen it in a long time, and this is a great story that could have been told better, in my opinion. You had some black ball players who were cast in good roles here. You've got Richard Pryor in one of his first movies.
He's kind of wasted, I think.
Yeah, and that role is something where there's a big scene. Let's not give it away, but it's kind of one of the more dramatic moments in the movie, and I thought it was just a complete strikeout, the way they handled that. So this is a film I would love to see remade, because I just think the story of what was going on in those, again, Negro League teams has to be told, but it didn't have to be told so comically. This one was directed by John Badham, who, would go on his follow-up film, I Love, which is Saturday Night Fever. That was his second film. This was his debut. And then, later he would do War Games and some other movies I really appreciated. I didn't love this film.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I loved it. I think, at the TCM Film Festival, I really wanted to see this movie. I wasn't able to. I think it was conflicting with maybe The Shawshank Redemption. I can't remember what it was going up against. But the thing I liked about this movie is just the way, the location, the way it was set. It kind of reminded me of the original The Muppet movie, just in the way that it was color graded, and there's a lot of great music here. There's a few scenes where Bingo is just parading around town with all sorts of Motown singers, and there's this is almost a musical. I mean, there's a lot of song and dance scenes, which I thought was fun.
Yeah, and that's fine, but I don't know if it worked as a baseball story. I thought some of the staged baseball scenes were some of the most inaccurate again, and that's what I'm kind of looking for, especially when we watched 8 baseball movies back to back.
I agree with that. I think I would give this a double probably, but I do think it fills a mold that we haven't filled with any of these other films.
And I too give it a double, but this is a film that some film historians like Danny Peary probably claim is one of the top baseball films ever made, and I would not put it in that category.
I don't know how much Danny Peary likes this film. I was reading what he wrote on Bingo Long, and he said that he thought it was fun, but not maybe much more than that. I think you just have to include, he includes the Jackie Robinson story. That's another one of the films we could have discussed. But in terms of black ball players, which obviously is a big part of baseball history, there aren't too many films, and obviously this is way before 42. With
Yeah, and I think 42 is probably the one that now has handled that topic better than anything, and there's some documentaries out there that would do the same. But this was the first, again, as we said, came out in 1976, and I think I mentioned I began working in baseball in the mid-1980s when I just got out of college, and that's when baseball first started remembering, there are all these great players, because some of them were still with us, thankfully, at the time. And I worked for teams that had honored Negro League All-Stars in like pregame ceremonies, and I had the pleasure and honor of meeting several of the guys. I remember meeting a guy named Double Duty Radcliffe, who was called Double Duty because he pitched game 1 of a doubleheader, and then he would catch game 2 of the doubleheader. He did double duty. And then Josh Gibson, and I might be getting this, or maybe it was Satchel Paige. I really need to look this up. But there was one player who they said was so fast he would turn off the light and then jump into his bed. When he was about ready to go to sleep, and he could turn off the light and be in his bed before the light turned off. He was that fast.
That's funny. Yeah, no, I definitely think there's a lot of great players shown fictionally here in Bingo Long, but that's nice. That's a good story there. There's one more film that we're going to be talking about today, and in some ways, it's also one of the more famous films. We're going to be jumping ahead now, finally, into the 1980s, where we're going to be discussing Robert Redford's The Natural.
TriStar Pictures presents Robert Redford in The Natural.
Again, The Natural is a film that is very famous. It's certainly it's been outshined, I think, by maybe Field of Dreams. But it's a great film. It follows Robert Redford as this star pitcher, and he's really this up and coming player, where the sky's the limit for him. But at a certain point, without where should I stop here without getting into spoilers?
Well, okay, so it's based on a short story, which I guess was really well known by Bernard Malamud. I might be mispronouncing his last name, but it's sort of based on something that really did happen to a ball player in the 1940s. So let's just say that Roy Hobbs, that's the character played by Robert Redford, who was doing this film after a little brief vacation from filming, is on his way to perhaps making it as a major leaguer. He meets the character that's supposed to be Babe Ruth, and because it's taking place during that era. And he gets sidetracked with the event that you won't spoil, I won't spoil. And then years later, we see Robert Redford now return as a much older rookie to the major leagues.
Yeah. So I guess without spoiling it, I think the thing I would compare this film to, if you're trying to see if this is something you'd be interested in, is this film is very ethereal in a lot of ways. Like, it's very dreamlike. There's a lot of moments in this film where you're not sure what's actually happening and what's kind of made up. It's probably most similar visually to Field of Dreams or Angels in the Outfield. And it's very well known for one scene at the end, but it's hard to talk about this film without spoiling it, I think.
Yeah, although I do think, the baseball fan or the movie fans who are listening to this podcast probably know how the movie ends, so I don't think you're spoiling it. But, it's directed by Barry Levinson. I guess we haven't mentioned that. And who was the cinematographer? Was it Caleb Deschanel?
I'm not sure actually who it was. I know, but yeah, Barry Levinson directed it. Not one of his, it's not one of his best films in my opinion. It's no Good Morning Vietnam or Rain Man in my opinion. But I thought The Natural was good. It wasn't great. Robert Redford is a fine actor. I think he sometimes can be a better director and a better writer than an actor. I think like the best thing he ever did was probably A River Runs Through It. Which he directed. And performance-wise, I think he's great in 3 Days on the Condor. I think he's great in All the President's Men.
Well, yeah, I'm going to add The Sting and Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid. Obviously.
Yeah, so you're a fan of his acting.
Right, I am. And, I think he does a great job, and I think he looks like a baseball player. I think he was 47 when he made this film. So, he's not even the age his Roy Hobbs character is supposed to be, which is probably late 30s as a rookie. But you can believe it. You can believe that this guy was a ball player, and he was an amazing pitcher when he was young, and then when he comes back in the movie, he's more of a hitter, but he's got incredible power. Where the movie, I think, has its issues with me is all the side stories. I mean, we have a big event early on, and then we have he's playing for a team that isn't very good, but they start winning. And the owner of the team doesn't want them to win, so
he starts accepting bribes.
You have a very miscast, I think, Robert Duvall, who's a sports writer who's trying to uncover the real story of Roy Hobbs. And you've got, the mafia connection, or maybe it's not mafia, but you've got mobster connection. You've got Kim Basinger, as sort of a woman who's going to potentially lead Redford's Roy Hobbs astray. And then you've got Glenn Close, who I think that's a weird role too.
Yeah, I think actually the way you're describing this film, kind of all these different competing interests, is really the main reason this film falls apart. I mean, it's got 15 different threads. There's part of this is a mobster film, part of this is an underdog story, part of this is a romance, part of this is a mystery. There's so many different threads here that the film doesn't know exactly which one it wants to follow. And then the baseball, we watched this with my younger brother, and he's a huge baseball film, and he thought just the baseball here made no sense.
Yeah, I mean, the last scene, again, we're not going to talk specifically about it, but if you follow the announcers, and that's one thing we saw in so many of these films, right?
Yeah.
We saw baseball announcers describing what's happening, and then headlines, right?
Yeah, newspaper headlines showing what happened.
Yeah, which was the one that probably had the worst? Was that the...
I think it happens every spring.
Okay.
Newspapers every 2 minutes.
But anyway, if you've watched the last scene, Redford strikes out. I mean, he takes 2 strikes, and then he swings and misses, so he's out, but I think it was just like the editing was poorly done, and maybe they called it a strike in the voiceover, or if you have it with closed captioning on. But the pitches were high, so maybe they were called balls, but the editing says they were strikes.
Well, I think what happened is I think they just put some sequences out of order, because he gets a strike 1, and then strike 2 is a foul ball. So that would be strike 2. And then strike 3 is an actual strike. But I think what they could have done, they called that strike 2 in the film when it should have been strike 3. So they should have put that third strike sequentially before the foul ball and had that be the third strike.
But it is funny. This is probably the second film, along with Bad News Bears, that I definitely saw in the theaters when it first came out. And I don't remember any of that. I don't remember anyone talking about any of that at the time it came out. So 40 years later, I guess we're all kind of watching it and second guessing it and using the internet to double check all this. But bottom line is, this is a great baseball film. It has some beautifully shot films, and it has the classic end scene, and it's got an amazing cast. It's worth seeing. I gave it a double.
Yeah, I think I'll give it a double as well, which means the only ones that I gave a triple to would be Pride of the Yankees and Bad News Bears.
Right, although I thought we even gave a homer to Bad News Bears.
Yeah. So there's a lot of swings and a lot of misses here, I guess, to continue with the baseball analogy. But this was fun. We watched complete variety of films here, and it really shows you, like you were saying, that the variety you can get in baseball movies.
Yeah, and really, again, there were some incredible baseball films that came out after the book was published. I really do think of any sport, it's the one that works best for transposing a story to celluloid. And I'd love to share one last baseball story if I can.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so again, this was my first job at a college, and I was a public relations assistant for the Astros. And Yogi Berra, who I mentioned earlier, but he might have been sort of who the Robert De Niro character was sort of loosely based on in Bang the Drum Slowly, because he was a catcher who had talent, but he was kind of known for being slow, saying some things that just didn't make sense. So they called them Yogiisms. So Yogi, when I worked for the Astros, was a coach, and he actually had a baseball show. It was like Siskel and Ebert at the movies, where he would go watch movies. Yogi loved talking about movies, although he wouldn't watch baseball movies. So I didn't work for the Astros when The Natural came out, but I'm pretty sure I was working for them when Field of Dreams came out. And he didn't want to put that on his show, but he literally had a syndicated show, and he gave it single, double, triple homer. And I know he loved talking about movies, and he would make these silly little statements about the movies. So anyway, Yogi had this syndicated show called Yogi Berra at the Movies, and one of the movies he reviewed was the movie Fatal Attraction, which starred Glenn Close, who we were just talking about, although I think he kept calling her Glen Cove because that's a city in Long Island near where the Yankees might have played. But anyway, Yogi was known for his yogiisms, classic, things that he would just say wrong, incorrectly. And they said, Yogi, did you get scared at Fatal Attraction? And he said, oh yeah, it was scary, but only at the scary parts. So Yogi was great, and I loved talking to him about baseball when I was your age.
Yeah.
And movies, really.
Yeah, no, that's really great. I think a lot of baseball players, baseball and movies have a lot in common, I think, in just kind of the way that they can tell great stories. But no, this has been a lot of fun. I think that all 8 of these movies were fun to watch. My mom joined us for 7 of these 8, so it was nice being able to do this little marathon. And if you have any other sports that you think that the two of us should cover together, let us know. Like we said, boxing would probably be a good one, but if you could think of some great basketball films that would be in Perry's book, definitely let me know in the comments below.
Yeah, and anytime you want to invite me back, as long as I didn't really just ruin your podcast completely in episode 3, I would love to come back and talk more movies with you, Colby.
Sounds great. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me, Dad, and until the next time, I'll see everybody at the ball game.